Okay, welcome everyone to the conclusion of our Atlantic Revolutions with Global Echoes as we look at the reflection on revolutions, pro and con. The legacies of the Atlantic Revolutions are still controversial. Were they necessary? Did those revolutions promote the freedoms they promised? Were they worth the costs of blood and money? And there's still a lot of debate about their origin, their outcome, and their influence. You know, to some people, they opened a completely new world of human potential. And in some places, especially France, it completely transformed their society. People began to, in a whole new way, actively participate in their government. But the revolutions also had many victims and critics and opponents, and conservatives believe that societies were organisms that should evolve slowly, and radical change invited disaster. And those critics argued that revolutions were largely unnecessary. So there's still a degree of struggle between historians with the pros and cons of revolutionary movements and their attempt to understand. Okay, let's jump right into the visual sources. Okay, the early years of the French Revolution, the Joyous Accord. Okay, before we even talk about what small little things we see and what little things we can pick out, like red coats and, I wish I would have known that was on there. Let me erase that. Little red coats and hats with feathers. Let's get down to the historical stuff that really matters. What changes during the first year of the Revolution, French Revolution, does this image reveal? What continuities of the past does it also suggest? Now consider the activity portrayed in the painting and the posture of the three figures. Well, the image reveals that social equality had replaced the social difference in the interaction between the different estates, and the depiction of the three figures hunting together is important. Right? Because before the revolution, hunting was an activity largely restricted to the elite. And there is still a clearly defined difference between the elites and the peasants as represented by their dress and where they're located at the table. How does it portray the idea of national unity? Well, the ideal of national unity is portrayed through the caption, which I know some of you don't read French, through the sharing of a dinner, a very important social activity that symbolized fellowship, and through the group partaking in the activity of hunting in the back, which once was a source of great tension between elites and peasants. Now, how are the representatives of the three estates distinguished from each other? Right, I brought that up just a second ago, two on one side, one on the other. So they're distinguished primarily by dress, right, with each wearing clothing that identifies their social class and where they're located. Right, the clergymen and the aristocracy are on one side while the peasant is on the other side. And notice the peasants hunting in the background. Keep in mind that before the revolution, peasants who hunted on the estates of the nobility were subject to harsh punishment or even death. So why do you suppose the artist chose to include them in the paintings? Well, the hunters in the background may have been included to indicate, in conjunction with the guns and net in the foreground, that the men around the table were taking a break from hunting. It's also a possibility. And they're doing something together. Okay. A reversal of roles. Right? The three estates of revolutionary France. I love this image. What different impressions of the revolution are conveyed by these images as compared to that of the first image? Right? Well, the first source portrays a new social order, if you will, where all social classes have become social equals. And the part opening picture portrays a new social order, but one where the third estate has reversed roles with the nobility and the dominance. Right? But the second one depicts the third estate seemingly intent on revenge and taking up arms against the other two privileged orders. What particular fears might animate the horror with which the clergy and nobility greet the awakening of the third estate? Well, the fact that the third estate is no longer restrained by chains and is now capable of action, right? And taking up arms of the third estate. And the surprise that the third estate is awakened from its slumber. Awareness of how badly the third estate was treated by the privileged orders is starting to wake people up. Okay. Let's talk about a revolution and religion. Patience, Monsignor, or Monsieur, Monsignor, yeah. Your turn will come. So how does this visual source reflect the outlook of the Enlightenment? Back in chapter 15 that we learned about. 16. Was that in 15 or 16? I think that was 15. Well, it represents the criticism by many and the rejection by some Enlightenment thinkers of supernatural religion. Right? It represents the frequent Enlightenment attacks on the church as an overly rich institution manned by gluttonous, lazy, and superficial pious clergy. But what criticisms of the church are suggested by this image? Why is the bishop on the left portrayed as a fat, even bloated figure? What is the significance of efforts to squeeze the priests? Right? Do you see how they're squeezing them? Based on their dress, what class do you think they represent? Well, the church is bloated with wealth that it misuses. And the image of the bishop may represent the belief that the clergy were gluttonous and lazy themselves, and that the church itself possesses too much wealth, which is misused. And efforts to squeeze the priests is most likely a metaphor for the efforts by revolutionaries to seize the wealth of the church for the use of the state. Note that the man in the press seems to be throwing up coins into a box, right, which most likely represents the state coffers. Now, the dress of the two men operating the press indicates that they are urban, professional men, and the two men in the foreground holding the bishop are a revolutionary soldier and a man dressed in clothing associated with some type of, probably a legal profession. And the caption that reads, patience, Monsignor, your turn will come. What do you imagine was the reaction of devout Catholics to such images and to the policies of de-Christianization? Well, images like these may have left devout Catholics uneasy, for they indicated both a systematic campaign against the church, as the caption indicates, and a campaign that continued to evolve and grow in its scope. Alternatively, devout Catholics may have found this image acceptable because it depicts revolutionaries attacking the wealth of the church, which many devout Catholics recognized as a problem, and depicts the elite clerics who had long been criticized by many devout Catholics for their shortcomings. And lastly, an English response to the revolution. Hell broke loose, or the murder of Louis. Okay, what is the significance of the demons and dragons in this cartoon? You notice how the soldiers at the bottom of the image are portrayed. Well, the demons and the dragons are present to emphasize that the devil was behind the execution, to create a sense in that the execution of the king was a portentous event in the battle between the good and evil, and to create a sense of chaos and disorder. And the soldiers at the bottom of the image imply that the artist wanted to directly associate revolutionaries with the devil and his minions. That's entirely possible. What meaning would you attribute to the caption "Hell broke loose"? What disasters might critics of the revolution have imagined coming in its wake? Well, the caption indicates that the execution of the king was an event that would lead to further chaos and disorder in France, and possibly that of the rest of Europe. And within France, critics might imagine anarchy and mob rule and the full seizure of power by radical revolutionaries. And beyond the borders of France, they might have feared the toppling of other monarchs. Once King Louis XVI was executed, the other monarchs of Europe were deathly afraid of what might happen in their countries. Something like that. I know that the king had been executed in the English Civil War back in the 1600s, but this was a much more significant turn of events because the French Revolution upset things the most with the complete transformation of their society. And that's a part of where that fear stems from once the king is executed. So how do you understand the beam of light from heaven that falls on Louis XVI? Well, the shaft of light might reflect traditional, Christian iconography, indicating that Louis XVI was saintly, a theory substantiated by the angel with the trumpet appearing from the cloud. It might symbolize Louis XVI's divinely ordained right to rule, right, divine right, which the devil in his revolutionary mentions sought to undermine, right, the opposition of the divine and their right to rule. It might serve to distinguish Louis as a force for order and good in what is otherwise a chaotic scene that's populated by devils and demons and other evil revolutionaries. Why was regicide regarded with such horror in England in the 1790s? Well, like I said, other monarchs feared for their own authority as well as their own safety. And regicide against the divinely ordained monarch was seen as even a crime against God. It had long been associated with patricide and therefore symbolized a breakdown in the traditional European social and political orders. And it symbolized the radicalization of the French Revolution. It was significantly more intense than many of the others. And those are our visual sources for Chapter 16, The Atlantic Revolutions and Global Echoes. I will see you guys again for Revolutions of Industrialization.